The opening of the Imperial Exhibition at Blenheim was a truly magnificent affair, and the whole atmosphere was one of refinement and sophistication. Silk dresses rustled in unison with the quiet whispers of gossip. Guests discussed the amazing flying billboards on multicolored balloons hovering above the perfectly trimmed lawns. The model for the fair was an opera singer named Antonio, and his life-size posters looked almost lifelike. That wasn't all. The event was also supposed to feature a grand session by the best-selling author. Nearby, in a peaceful, picturesque spot in the forest, there was a village with incredible hot springs. The distinguished guests were served an amazing snow wine, which could not be found anywhere else in the empire. And for everything, there was only one person to thank, and this luxury was the merit of Her Serene Highness the Grand Duchess. Duchess Annette, a lady with a sweet smile in a blue dress, appeared before the guests, her eyes not only revealing nobility, but also a subtle spark of coquetry, which made her even more attractive. Suddenly, a young gentleman approached her, who had been looking for her for a long time and could not find her anywhere. The young man tenderly hugged the Duchess around the waist right in front of all the guests, and admitted that he had been incredibly nervous all this time. The venerable gentleman's name was Roik, and he was sure it didn't matter, since the sweet Duchess hadn't yet given him that very kiss. Everything turned out completely by chance. The heroine planned to live quietly and peacefully for a year, get a divorce, and disappear forever. But in the end, no matter what she took on, everything turned out grandiose. Somehow she even managed to charm the Grand Duke of the North, whom every girl in the Empire dreamed of. With every moment of her life, she realized more and more that she was born to become a great duchess. It all happened a year ago, in the luxurious Frey's mansion, when the heroine was just thinking about marrying the Grand Duke. After the news of the wedding, the heroine's relative was indignant at why he was being asked to send only 500 deniers to the wedding with the Marquis. For the celebration itself, the Duke decided to send representatives in his place, and the Marquis did not understand what Annette had done and why the Grand Duke was behaving so insolently. Now the heroine was seriously scolded for the fact that she treated the Duke badly, whom she had never even seen in the eye, although knowing the original, sending a representative to the wedding in her place was already too much. Not long ago, the main character found herself in a novel, the story of a saint who overcomes difficulties and finds the love of a duke. Annette, however, took possession of a holy deception, namely, the illegitimate daughter of a famous marquis. She must become a real villain and interfere with the love of the main characters, making selfish plans against everyone. In the original, even after her wedding with the Grand Duke, she remains in the capital and leads the main character on, not letting her live a quiet life. Later, the villain receives her punishment, and one day she is executed by a terrible hanging. But the heroine of this novel is not at all the Annette from the original story, and so she has no intention of staying here or giving up on marriage. Father was sure that a letter of dissatisfaction should be officially sent to the Grand Duke, and the wedding should be postponed until the necessary funds for the ceremony could be found. The lady suggested another option, to hold the wedding in a temple, and decided to take advantage of this marriage as the only chance. Annette stated that if the handing over ceremony were held in the temple, then the budget sent by the Grand Duke would be quite sufficient. A wedding in an evening church without guests, alone, could have dealt a blow to the family's reputation. For Annette, a wedding was an event where only the vows were important, and she did not want to bother her father with such trifles. For the first time, the gentleman heard something sensible from his daughter, because she had never before suggested saving the family budget. The father gladly accepted the offer and offered in return to call a special priest to perform the ceremony. The first goal that the heroine set was successfully achieved, and she will still be able to marry the Grand Duke for such a sum. Overjoyed, Annette left her father's office but saw her brother in the hallway, who declared that his sister had done yet another useless thing. The eldest son, named Perrin Fries, the main heir of the Marquis, always treated this girl not very nobly. He was unhappy with the fact that the wedding was going to be held without guests, and assured her that the more his sister did this, the funnier she would look in the eyes of the Grand Duke. On the one hand, she understood everything perfectly, but it was just her game, where she set the rules. The heroine knew that the family refused to help the North with the demonic beasts, and the previous Duke of Blenheim, in order to protect the North, was forced to make a bloody pact with a dragon and died. And it was quite natural. The family hated them with every cell of their soul. The brother was sure that their father was trying to use her marriage as a means of curbing the power of the current Grand Duke. The sister had no reason to voluntarily sacrifice herself. She was sure that she had to bring at least some benefit to the family. Perhaps it looked like concern from her brother and should have looked sweet, but now she asked him to get out of the way, calling him rude. 2 weeks had passed since she had entered the holy deception, and Annette had adapted much better than she thought, but she still didn't want to return to her old world. Of course, in this luxurious mansion, everyone did not treat her very well, but this was not surprising. The maids whispered behind the Duchess's back, and in this place the girl did not have a single person with whom she would communicate closely. More accurately, the maid simply avoided her, but she had been through worse things in her previous life working in the advertising industry. Although everyone pretended that the girl simply didn't exist, she wasn't offended by these people, and on the contrary, it was even convenient. The time traveler, dependent on dopamine, nurtured by modern civilization, felt too bored and urgently needed extreme sports. Unfortunately, she was not allowed to leave the estate freely, and even as a Grand Duchess she would have more freedom of movement, and most importantly, she was very curious to visit the North. It is impossible, having been reborn in another world, not to visit there, in the beautiful lands covered with snow, where beautiful castles with high spires are located all around. The most important thing is that it is there that the Grand Duke lives, the handsome man from the novel, whom Annette herself would like to see with great enthusiasm as soon as possible. The Duchy of Blenheim, located in the north of the empire, was famous for its rugged cliffs and dark forests that held ancient secrets. In a huge castle amidst snow and eternal cold, a venerable gentleman carefully read a letter with a family crest from a famous family. As he read each line, he understood more and more that the Marquis had apparently become completely desperate since he had decided to put forward such a proposal. Unfortunately, this was the Duke's assistant's oversight. He was sure that because of such a sum, the Marquis would have to break off the engagement. The Grand Duke, the owner of the northern lands of Blenheim named Roik, was sure that this woman would never set foot on his lands, and the Marquis should not even dream of it. The castle, perched on the cliff top like a stone guardian, has seen the passing of eras and preserved the memory of heroes and villains. His assistant, Farrell, asked how the Duke was going to refuse her, since he couldn't just leave the bride after the ceremony. Duke Roik, ruler of the northern lands, was a man of few words and stern, like his lands. The assistant looked at the gentleman with surprised eyes and wondered if he was really going to do this. The idea of leaving the girl right in the middle of the wedding ceremony seemed too harsh to the assistant. The commander of the knightly detachment declared that the girl, taking advantage of her kinship, would certainly bring a bunch of henchmen with her, and this needed to be nipped in the bud. The ruler of the northern lands asked which of his assistants would go and nip this in the bud. The gentlemen in his office that late evening stood silently around the table, and none of them were ready to do so. The assistant suggested that he should marry a woman who was close in spirit, by proxy, and it was unlikely that anyone would agree to this. Unexpectedly, the Duke ordered that this task be given to an assistant, but Farrell did not understand why he should be the one to handle such matters. He was to be accompanied by a captain named Hedrick. The heroes had business to attend to along the way, so the Duke asked to take several knights from the squad with him. Now the ruler of the northern lands had to formalize a marriage with the daughter of the enemy who killed his parents, and after some time, simply divorce her. Sometime later, the solemn day of the wedding arrived, and Annette's assistant carefully styled the lady's hair. Looking in the mirror, Annette noted that today she looked quite attractive and pretty. The maid warned that the Marquis was so worried that everyone in the north would treat the lady badly. It was for this reason that he personally selected the people who would serve the lady, although Annette herself did not experience any concern. For the father, this was just one of the ways to keep an eye on the northern lands because of his daughter, and he was not at all sincere about it. Despite her father's wishes, the heroine was determined to ensure that everything did not go according to the Marquise's plan. Today, people gathered in a luxurious hall to congratulate the newlyweds, and the heroes had to seal the sacred union of their eternal love. Instead of the Duke, his representative, Assistant Farrell, arrived, and he was given the honor of standing with the bride at the altar. This young man turned out to be much more handsome and taller than the heroine had expected, and Farrell, on behalf of the Duke of the North, swore to love and respect the girl for the rest of his life. Annette breathed a sigh of relief, realizing what kind of life awaited her there, and it would be just good if she wasn't kicked out of there right away. Now the newlyweds had to exchange rings, and Annette proudly vowed to fulfill her marital duty with all her heart and soul. The heroine could not call herself some kind of leper, and she was sure that everything would turn out wonderfully for her. Finally, they exchanged rings, and from that moment the priest declared the marriage of the two to be complete. From this moment on, the main character named Annette could proudly consider herself a duchess and a noble wife of the ruler of the north. During the ceremony, the maid sighed and realized that now she would have to serve this illegitimate child again. The world was too cruel for her. She did not want to follow her mistress at all, and really wanted to serve Lady Radriel. As soon as the maid decided to enter the mistress's room, she saw a wedding dress abandoned on the sofa, and the girl was not in the room. After the wedding, the Duke's assistant decided to run away as quickly as possible so as not to meet the Grand Duchess under any circumstances. He decided to simply leave a letter and state that he had to leave urgently and therefore could not take the Duchess with him. While the young man was running, someone approached him, snatched the sheet of paper from his hands, and asked where he was going in such a hurry. Farrell said confidently that he needed to leave as quickly as possible to avoid running into the Duchess, but what a surprise it was when he saw her next to you. The girl immediately suggested going together to the Duke, and she was sure that it was good that they met right now, before they missed each other. The young man's plan completely failed. The Duchess found him herself, and he didn't have time to leave quickly. Just think. The young man ran away right after the ceremony, and the Grand Duke turned out to be quite a fruit, but good thing the heroine had prepared in advance. The young man warned them that he was in a great hurry, and in fact they did not have a carriage for the Duchess to go with them. He tried in every way to prevent the girl from going with him, but Annette had already prepared her carriage, and had also long ago collected the necessary things. The carriage was quite old and shabby. The young man was worried that the lady was really going to travel in such a carriage, and the journey was very difficult. Annette had already put down as many pillows as possible, and warned that she would be perfectly fine. Farrell stated that the lady didn't even have guards to accompany her, but the heroine had already thought about that in advance. She actually found knights who were ready to go with her to the cold and endless north. The lady stated that they say that these are the best knights of the empire, and they make an immediately impressive impression. Annette suggested that the assistant go first, and she herself was going to follow him, and happily jumped into the carriage. Looking out the window, she thought of only one thing: it had finally happened. She had been waiting for this moment for too long. After the wedding, they finally managed to get rid of the Freys family, and Annette was incredibly happy about it. The Duke's representative seemed so kind-hearted, and the heroine suggested that this might even be very appropriate. Before the carriage had left, the butler approached Annette, holding a box in his hands, and said that he had brought a gift from the young master. The heroine's brother asked her to give her something in case she suddenly decided to leave right now, and they would never see each other again. It was strange how the brother managed to find out that the girl was going to leave immediately after the ceremony. The brother personally came to the ceremony and then immediately left, and the butler warned that perhaps he decided to give a wedding gift. But Annette had no idea that her brother had actually come to the ceremony, and she hadn't even noticed him there. 2 carriages were ready to set off for the northern lands under the supervision of brave knights. The butler saw the lady off, and the girl was ready to set off into her new life. Suddenly, a maid ran out of the mansion and shouted where her mistress was right now. The assistant looked at Janet in surprise, not understanding why she ran out into her room screaming loudly in search of Annette. Janet wondered if the butler had seen the lady by any chance, and she did not at all expect that she had just actually left. The Marquis asked to be sure to bring her after the ceremony, and Janet certainly did not expect such a turn of events. Only now the butler reported that their mistress had left for the northern land to her new husband, the Duke. And right at that moment, the heroine was looking with interest at the expensive gilded box that her brother had given her. The carriages, accompanied by knights, moved slowly through the ancient forest, paving the way to the northern duchy. The wedding gift from her brother still haunted the girl, and she had no idea what could be inside. Last time, she angrily asked him to get out of the way. After that moment, they no longer communicated, and it was strange to receive a gift from this guy. She carefully opened the box, not believing her eyes, because he certainly couldn't have given her something valuable. Inside the box, on the scarlet velvet, were rare, expensive jewelry that was impossible to take your eyes off. The heroine looked at her gift with interest, not believing that her brother had decided to give it to her just like that. There was also a small note in the box, and it only had 2 lines written on it. If Annette needed help, she needed to contact Arsen's aunt. This meant that my brother had indeed sent it as a wedding gift, with all due respect and gratitude. Not only did he personally come to the wedding, but he also guessed about his little sister's escape plan and took care of her. She was a little nervous about deviating from the original plot, but it turns out she now has an ally. It was good that everything worked out this way, and the lady was enthusiastically ready to start a new life in the Northern Kingdom. After some time on the carriage's journey, they decided to stop so that the horses and knights could rest a little and regain their strength. She didn't even notice how, clutching the box in her arms, she fell asleep right on the soft pillows and slept for almost half the journey. Someone called her by name. The girl opened her eyes and wondered if they had really arrived. She had missed the whole journey. The Duke's assistant said that they needed to make a stop, as another person was about to join them. The heroine asked the assistant, as she had told him earlier, he had too much to do, and he was ready to leave her. He offered to exchange carriages, but the lady refused, and there was still very little time left before arrival, and she decided to just rest and sleep. She slept well on the cozy pillows, and as soon as she woke up, the sleepiness disappeared as if by magic, so the lady decided to go out for a walk and breathe some fresh air. Annette felt quite wonderful. If you think about it, this was the first time she had completely left the confines of the marquisate. Suddenly she overheard the knights talking about what they should do now if they brought this woman. Hiding behind the carriage, Annette decided to eavesdrop on their conversation, because they were definitely talking about her. Someone said that she should have been refused immediately, and that accompanying the lady was not included in the wedding contract, while the assistant tried to calm the knights, assuring them that she was not so bad. There were rumors of a false saint, and they were sure that the lady was deceiving the Duke of the Northern Lands. The knights suggested simply leaving the girl in the forest for someone to pick her up, but the heroine knew that this was all pure slander. Among them there was one good knight who was perplexed as to how one could say such a thing about a noble lady. No matter what happened, he was going to follow the girl to the end, because he couldn't allow himself to do that. While Annette was trying to eavesdrop on their conversation in a secluded place, the commander of the knightly detachment unexpectedly approached her. He immediately realized that the girl was definitely eavesdropping on something and caught her red-handed. The young man did not try to find out anything, but Annette was already caught and wanted the gentleman to simply listen to her, and she did not want to eavesdrop on purpose. Hedrick approached the knights and asked what was going on here, why everyone was discussing something heatedly. The assistant reported that they were escorting Her Grace the Grand Duchess to Blenheim. Hedrick saw out of the corner of his eye that the lady was still eavesdropping on the carriage, but now he knew something. The lady only pretended that she was simply walking in the forest because it was a beautiful sunny day outside. Everything seemed to go well. She was able to eat naturally, and the captain of the Knightly Order of Blenheim welcomed the new mistress. Hedrick promised to deliver the girl safely, but all his knights, it turned out, thought differently. The heroine could now at least rely on someone in this situation, and she understood that Hedrick definitely shouldn't abandon her in the middle of the road. Now she needed to establish relationships with the new heroes with whom she would have to live in the future. Hedrick warned that as soon as they crossed the capital's border, they would arrive in the city and planned to stay at a hotel there. Annette suggested staying at Rosie's Inn. She had heard it was quite nice, but Farrell was sure it was always crowded and there would hardly be any room. The lady looked at the young man with a charming gaze and insisted that since they were here, they needed to stop by Rosie's hotel. The assistant tried to dissuade her, because even if there were places there were too many of them, but the commander decided to fulfill his or her duties. And if there are not enough rooms, then all the knights can spend the night in the field, but the lady still needs to be allocated a separate room. Hedrick agreed unexpectedly easily and ordered everyone to go on a trip to Rosie's hotel. During the journey, all the knights were terribly tired, and none of them wanted to spend the night in the field. No one knew whether the hotel was really that good, but since the Duchess had given the order, the responsibility lay with her. Farrell turned to the lady and decided to find out if everything was okay with her, but this question sounded too strange for her. The young man bowed before the new Duchess, and they had only one option left to pray that there would be free rooms in this hotel. Farrell was rather soft-hearted, clearly worried about whether they would love the new Duchess, but they could hardly imagine how surprised they would be in the future. The sunset over the hotel painted the sky in shades of flame. The sounds of the city faded, giving way to soft music coming from the open windows of the restaurant. The knights found out, as expected, that there were no available rooms at the moment. Some of the young men even tried to find at least one, but it looks like there is a group of guests, and there will definitely not be any free rooms in the near future. Everything happened as expected, and his assistant was ready to burst into tears, because he understood this perfectly well. He was sure the captain had some other plan, but it was just the whim of a spoiled girl. For a weak girl, spending the night in a field would be difficult, and it would be good if she gave in and said that she could not go further. This was exactly the plan, and the captain ordered everyone to get ready to leave for the city, since there was absolutely no room in the hotel. The assistant told the lady about this, and the girl was sure that this could not be, asking her to go and check again. Farrell had already checked several times, and was sure that even after he went again, absolutely nothing would change. One of the knights shouted, wondering if the lady had really decided to play a joke on them, since they had actually checked everything. The lady handed the assistant some paper while he was sure that everyone would have to spend the night in the field today. He began to slowly read what was written, becoming more and more perplexed with each line. He didn't understand what kind of document it was. The young man looked excited, as if he couldn't believe his eyes what he had just read. Annette, with a smile in her eyes, asked why he continued to stand there and why he didn't hand over this paper to the owner of the hotel. As it turned out, the lady had booked all the rooms and dinner for all the nights in advance, and her actions left everyone incredibly shocked. Everyone was sure that this was just her impudent whim, and the knights did not even believe that the girl had thought everything through in advance. The foundation of hospitality for business partners is reservations, and Annette has long since calculated everything. She happily suggested that the hungry and tired knights have dinner first, because on a full stomach, especially in a warm environment, even a cracker would melt. A few days ago, Annette went to the information office to find out some information. The gentleman showed her the recent proceeds from the sale of jewelry, but the amount did not seem very significant. For Lady Annette, this amount was indeed suspiciously small, and looking at the coins, she decided to figure out what was going on. She asked if the merchant had sold the jewelry for so little, but the young man insisted that they had not bargained hard to get more profit. Perhaps the Marquis did not give expensive jewelry to his illegitimate daughter, and this was the main reason. Here it all came down to money. The young man asked why the lady had gone to them and not to the jewelers. Annette went there for a reason. The Marquis was not supposed to know that she had decided to sell her jewelry to save money for a rainy day. The lady merely awkwardly admitted that she had one more small matter to ask the young man from the trading shop. Annette said that the Duke must have already applied to use the gate. She wanted to know when they would be back. If everything went according to the original, then they would try to leave without her. The heroine could not allow this, but the young man could not provide delicate information like a schedule. Annette asked if it would be possible to check even the register by offering the merchant an interesting sum. She understood that the young man definitely shouldn't refuse, because right in front of him lay a small bag of money. He stated that they really did have a specific list, and Annette, with joyful eyes, asked to show it as soon as possible. She carefully studied the documents and realized that everyone was really planning to leave without her. According to the schedule, they are leaving immediately after the wedding, as soon as the ceremony is over. The young man said that if they were in such a hurry, they could have stayed at the Rosie Hotel, but it was a pity they didn't take that route. There's even a former Imperial Palace chef working at this hotel, and the food is incredible. The rooms were selling out fast, so you had to get there before sunset, and this was the perfect place. The lady asked if it was possible to book rooms there in advance, but the young man was sure that it was simply impossible. Since the hotel is well known, it makes no sense for the staff to wait for a dubious guest when there are customers right in front of them. Annette had a prudent plan, and the lady said that she would like to pay everything in advance. The tired knights, together with their lady, went into the dining hall where they were already awaited, and a huge table was set. The chef came out to the guests today. They had prepared more dishes, and the knights could even ask for additional food if there was not enough for someone. The table was incredibly varied, with plates filled with fresh-baked fish with vegetables, as well as a huge baked chicken with lemons. The knights looked at the sumptuous treats in surprise, and one of them asked the captain if they could really eat this. None of them expected that so soon they would sit down at a huge oak table and be able to enjoy a delicious treat. Hedrick stated that if Her Grace had already paid for everything, then of course the knights could begin their meal. The young men happily grabbed pieces of bread and began to devour the delicious food with joyful eyes. Considering how long it took them to get here, it's no wonder everyone was very hungry and tired. The assistant decided to ask the lady why she decided to book rooms in this particular hotel. Annette said she heard that all visitors simply dream of staying at the famous Rosie Hotel. The young man did not understand how she managed to find out about this, and did he really think that she was not going to go further with them? Although they had not planned to linger, she could not tell the truth that she knew the whole plot in advance, and admitted that she simply wanted to thank the knights for the journey they had made. She wished everyone a bon appetit, seeing how the young men were happily just relaxing and enjoying the moment. The lady wished everyone a wonderful evening, so that they would have a good rest after the long journey and gain strength. In this way, she tried to increase her sympathy in order to gain the support of the knights in advance before arriving in the duchy. Honestly, none of the knights expected such care from the lady, and only thanks to her were they able to get into this inn. Of course, after this, the knights began to suspect that all the rumors were untrue, and this girl was a completely different person. It was early sunny morning, which meant that it was time for the knights and mistress to set out on their journey again. Something strange happened in this beautiful place this morning, and after a wild evening, all the knights lay surrounded by empty bottles. Annette came out to them and realized that they had probably just drunk too much last night, wanting to relax. The lady was pleased. The knights had had a great time last night and were definitely well rested. Not all the knights had decided to spend their time in this way last night, and among them there was one young man who felt just fine this morning. He greeted the lady, and the lady asked Sir Leon if he had had a good rest. The knight did not expect the lady to know his name. He brought a whole pot of tomato stew for his companions with special care. In Blenheim, they used to make a spicy stew the morning after a feast, and this was something of a hangover dish. A scorching aroma wafted throughout the entire room, and the lady smelled with interest the food she had never tried before. Leon warned that food had also been prepared for her ladyship and asked if it was time to serve it. Smelling the incredible aroma of the tomato stew, the lady asked if she could eat the dish with the knights. This was food for commoners, and Leon certainly didn't expect the Duchess to want to try ordinary potato soup. All the knights sat down at the table with their mistress. The assistant warned them that the food was much spicier than what the fragile girl was used to eating. In fact, the heroine really liked spicy food, and in her past life she often ate spicy food. The knights looked at the lady with interest to them. She was like a foreigner trying kimchi for the first time. The very first spoonful of hot kimchi was simply incredible, and how she had missed such spiciness for a long time. Her heart began to beat from the fiery taste, and the lady took the plate in her hands with great pleasure and continued eating the kimchi without a spoon. The knights couldn't stop watching. The dish was really very spicy, and the lady was desperately gobbling up the stew. After the hot, spicy dish, the fatigue disappeared as if by magic, and Annette felt simply wonderful. The knights congratulated the lady because she had just been initiated into the northern inhabitants, and there is no person there who does not love this road. Visitors often couldn't stand the spiciness of this dish just before their eyes. A sweet lady ate the entire plate in one gulp. Annette even asked for another serving, and she was incredibly fond of spicy food. This evening, the Duke received a message: the Grand Duchess will return to the duchy with the knights. It is necessary to prepare a room for her grace. The Duke even wondered if his assistant had gone completely crazy, since they had initially agreed on something completely different. Having given the letter to the butler, the Duke sighed and realized that it seemed that the order from his superiors really meant nothing to Farrell. The butler of Blenheim Manor, a venerable gentleman named Whitley, read the letter with interest. He understood that they should prepare for the reception of her grace, but the Duke still did not understand the Marquise's daughter and why she was behaving this way. Any noble lady would consider the absence of the groom at the wedding as disrespect to her family, but this girl seemed to be from another planet. He even suggested that perhaps she was blackmailing Farrell, and the Marquise's daughter was famous for being a notorious villain. He told the butler about this, but the man only stated that the Duke himself was called a terrible man who drinks the blood of monsters. And Royk knew better than anyone that rumors should never be trusted, because he himself found himself in such a situation. Judging by the noblewoman's behavior, she is clearly not an ordinary lady, and it is not without reason that she is planning to come to the north. Perhaps it was for the best. Fragile women do not survive in the north, and her resilience suited her. At that moment, the Duke wondered why he was even thinking about this girl. It was impossible to send her back after the long journey anyway, so the Duke asked for a room to be prepared and was going to send the girl back in a few days. He was sure that this would be quite enough, and he certainly did not intend to live a family life. Their marriage was only on paper, the heroes did not know each other, and neither of them was going to take it seriously. After leaving Rosie's Inn, the carriages, accompanied by their nightly escort, passed through the main gate and headed north. The closer they got to the north, the more and more snow appeared in the beautiful forest. Heating water during the trip was quite difficult, and the assistant was sure that the Duchess would not be able to wash herself in the river, like all nights. But no one expected to see a girl sitting on the bank of the river this early morning. One of the knights approached the lady. He didn't even immediately realize that it was her, laughing at what a strange hat he had just seen. It was one of the knights, Sir Johas was sure. One of the knights was just sitting on the riverbank. Annette smiled sweetly and asked if the gentleman had also come to wash himself with cold, invigorating water. The assistant ordered him to heat water for the lady, but he certainly did not expect to see her washing herself in the cold river. The lady asked the knight not to worry. The river water was very refreshing, and she liked it much better. Johas was incredibly surprised. The girl washed herself in the river, cooked food, and she had already gained the favor of other knights. She slept peacefully in the forest, wrapped in a sleeping bag, and certainly did not look like a noble aristocrat who was used to sleeping in a cozy, soft bed. After breakfast, the heroes decided to hit the road again, and the road was quite long. Annette carried her suitcase herself, but as soon as the knights saw this, they were surprised why the fragile girl was carrying heavy things. Finally, the knights began to open up to her. Now they were ready to help her, and each was ready to take responsibility for the lady's safety. At first, the young men treated her very warily. They didn't even talk to the lady and tried not to pay attention to her. But now they seemed not to consider her a noble lady at all, and sitting next to them by the fire, she looked like their friend. Johas enthusiastically offered the lady to try the dried meat, the spices of which tasted simply magnificent. The heroes will soon enter the duchy, and the heroine decided to find out a little about the Grand Duke, and perhaps the knights will tell her anything she wants. Sitting by a cozy fire, the lady asked what food the Grand Duke preferred, what he loved most. Johas thought for a while, but only replied that the gentleman ate everything and he didn't know about his preferences. The gentleman had only one hobby: he constantly hunted magical monsters and participated in battles. The Duke of the Far North is quite stern in nature, and it is said that he can go days without speaking, and behind his back people call him an ice floe. The Grand Duke may not have been very kind, but all the knights considered their master a very good man. The young man decided to find some good words to say about the captain, and was ready to tell the girl the whole truth. At just 15 years old, the Duke of the North reached the pinnacle of his skill and became the youngest swordmaster. No one else in the empire was able to defeat the demonic beasts with just one deft blow except the Duke of the North. The knights said that the Lord also takes great care of the inhabitants of his lands, and every resident praises him without stopping. Now it was clear to the heroine that the Grand Duke was omnivorous, possessed enormous strength, and was incredibly fond of his lands. And she was sure, as a result, that he would definitely despise her, the worthless daughter of the Marquis Fraise. But Annette was not one to be easily broken, and even if the Duke tried to do so, he would not succeed. She considered herself a slave of tenacity, who would enter into contracts even with the most vicious clients, and she was ready to get closer to the Grand Duke by any means necessary. Annette and the knights arrived in the northern lands, where snow-covered castles rose on the hills like slumbering giants, covered in a white shroud. Annette, wrapped in a fur cape, carefully looked around the surroundings. In these harsh lands, one could feel a special, primeval force that made her heart beat faster. The Grand Duke's holdings turned out to be vast, the castle gigantic, and the ground, bound by ice, crunched underfoot. Farrell warned her about the summer. His lordship is now very busy with business, so he will not be able to meet her. Annette hoped that at least he wouldn't kick her out right away, and said that there was nothing wrong with that. She understood perfectly well that the venerable gentleman had business, and the heroes were met by the butler Whitley, who greeted the Duchess. After a long journey, the lady was probably tired. The butler politely invited her to look at the new chambers. Even though the butler looked quite young, the lady felt some pressure when she entered the new room. She did not believe that she would now live here. Annette warned that if the Grand Duke suddenly came, she would like to see him and say hello as soon as possible. Whitley warned that as soon as his lordship arrived, he would immediately report this information to him. The heroine sighed with relief. The room turned out to be incredibly warm and cozy, just like in a fairy tale. She had no point in worrying anymore, and as a Grand Duchess, she was going to do her job properly. Besides, the lady was incredibly beautiful. As soon as the Grand Duke saw her, he would definitely lose his head. Annette was spinning around in front of the mirror, and suddenly, looking at her reflection, she noticed something strange. The knights deliberately didn't tell the girl that there were some dirty spots on her face, so as not to embarrass her, and only now did she notice this oversight. Farrell went to his master and asked how he could treat the current Grand Duchess in this way. Roik looked at his assistant in bewilderment and decided that he had really gone crazy during the trip. The lady had just arrived in the Grand Duchy for the first time, and the assistant could not understand how it was possible to send the new bride back immediately. He assured her that the lady was clearly tired from the journey, and Roik wondered if the pampered princess had complained along the way. To Farrell, this girl was not an impudent aristocrat or a pampered princess. She cooked food without hesitation and slept on the damp ground. And if the Duke had seen what an old carriage her Grace had arrived in, he would certainly not have spoken like that again. The Duke looked out the window and saw the carriage in which the future Duchess had arrived, and he clearly could not believe his eyes. In a small tiny window, he saw a young lady with long snow-white hair, which immediately caught his attention. Her long, silky hair reminded the Duke of the snowy mountains that cover the endless cold north. The Duke asked his assistant not to disobey his orders again, allowed the girl to rest for a few days, but then still intended to send her back. The Duke reflected that it would take patience to travel to the far north in such a carriage, but for this princess it would be better to return to the safety of the capital as soon as possible. Annette managed to rest a little, and after some time she was eagerly awaiting the appearance of the Grand Duke, but the butler said he was still busy. The next day the Duke didn't come either, and the heroine couldn't believe that he really didn't have a free minute. Also, a few days later, the butler warned that the Duke was still busy, and this meant that he would not appear again. So the heroine spent about 3 days waiting and decided whether the Duke was deliberately trying to avoid her. Since the Grand Duke had done this, the heroine had no choice but to take action right now. If you think about it, it was all too strange from the very beginning, and the Duke didn't even appear in front of the bride for a minute. The next day, Annette told the butler that she would like to see the magnificent castle. The butler warned that the castle's structure was a military secret and that personal permission from his lordship and the Grand Duke was required to inspect it. Unfortunately, the butler also could not reveal the location of his lordship's chambers to the lady. For Annette, it was no different now than being confined to the mansion she had lived in before. In the original novel, the heroine was never able to speak with the Grand Duke, and their marriage was ultimately annulled. So this time there was nothing to be done, and since the Duke himself could not come out to her, she decided to simply find him herself. After all, the Grand Duke's room must be the most luxurious and noticeable in the duchy. The heroine walked down the corridor, examining every door, with a great desire to find her future husband. Annette assumed that if she met him at every door, sooner or later she would definitely find him. She approached each door and pulled the handle, but for some reason all the doors were locked, and even after knocking, no one opened. Annette stubbornly continued to knock on every door, but most of the doors were indeed simply closed. Surprisingly, one room was already open, but only the maids were in it, and they were very surprised to see their new mistress. Annette couldn't just give up, and the maids didn't understand why the new Duchess decided to drop in on them. The other door was also open. It was a huge kitchen where chefs were busy preparing unique dishes. Thus, the heroine knocked on almost all the doors, but unfortunately she was still unable to find the Duke's chambers. She was not going to give up, and finally found the door, knocking on which for the first time someone answered. There were some people in the office. They were sorting through important papers, and Annette noticed their exhausted faces. They greeted the new Duchess with respect. The lady asked them not to pay attention, hoping that she had not disturbed anyone. The room she entered turned out to be the office of the trainee administrators, where employees were hard at work. Intern is a word that connotes overtime and low pay, and Annette understood this perfectly well, as she was a former office worker. These guys were the hardest workers in this castle, and Annette thanked the talented people for their work for the benefit of the castle. Having wished everyone a wonderful job, the lady was still planning to find the Duke's office to finally talk to him. The trainees were puzzled as to why the lady had come to such a place, and even the Grand Duke had never been here, and some even suggested that she was a spy. One of the employees asked to hide all important documents well, while others, on the contrary, were glad to finally see the new Duchess. The assistant reported to the Duke. The trainee administrators met the Grand Duchess, and Her Grace spent the entire day inspecting the castle. She saw everyone from the grooms to the laundresses, and even the Duke laughed, wondering if she had really come here to spy. The assistant stated that the lady was still looking for the gentleman, and she was being too persistent. Even the butler had already asked if the Duke would be willing to meet her at least once, as he had already run out of options for refusal. While the Duke was thinking about what to do, right down the corridor he saw the Duchess, who was clearly in a hurry to get somewhere. The Duke did not want his mistress to notice him at all, and grabbed the assistant by the collar to hide. He asked him not to breathe and not to talk to her until they hid in a place where the Duchess could definitely not notice them. The assistant looked at the Duke with bewilderment, and his rudeness seemed too insistent to him. But Roik looked at the young man with a menacing gaze, making it clear to him that he should immediately shut his mouth and not make a sound. All this time, the Duke kept an eye on the Duchess out of the corner of his eye to understand where she was heading. It seemed to him that the girl somehow saw him, although from the first floor she definitely could not notice them. Even Pharrell had already asked the assistant to simply meet with the new Duchess, but the master did not want to listen to his nonsense anymore. Roik had been deliberately avoiding this girl for her own good, and he was sure he was doing the right thing now. Old memories surfaced in his mind when, on one of the ordinary evenings, a terrible tragedy happened. That evening the Duke's hands were shaking, cold sweat was running down his face, and he had no idea why it had happened. He only remembered the moment when he saw the girl's body, in a luxurious pink dress, lying on the cold marble floor. Therefore, the Duke was sure that if he continued to avoid the meeting, then everyone would simply consider him an unlucky guy whose wife had left him. If they saw each other, Annette's life would be doomed, and she would only be convinced of what a terrible husband she had. The day turned out to be unusually clear, as if nature itself, tired of the protracted gray everyday life, decided to make up for lost time. She decided to spend this morning outside drinking hot tea, but suddenly she started sneezing violently. The knight brought a warm robe for the girl. 3 hours had already passed, and he suggested that she simply go inside. Annette couldn't go looking for her herself, because everyone was watching her every step, so she had no choice but to just stay here. The knight also could not reveal the location of his lordship's chambers, and Annette decided to inquire why the master continued to avoid her. The gentleman was definitely pretending that he wasn't even in the castle, and Annette couldn't understand how he could not even show his face. All she had to do was live in peace with him for about a year, and that was the main condition for the plot to be preserved. In the original, Marquis Fraise will later rebel, and the heroine's fate can change dramatically in an instant. Therefore, until then, she must remain a Grand Duchess, so that her fate does not turn out too sad. Her plan was to live quietly and unnoticed for a year, then get a divorce and move somewhere far away, but to do this she needed to meet with the Grand Duke and come to an agreement. The knight understood perfectly well that the lady simply wanted to see him, and decided to lift her spirits by offering her some tomato soup. Annette's mouth watered when she heard about this dish, and the knight told her that there was a place where they made tomato soup in the Blenheim style. It would be a nice change of scenery, and Annette decided to go outside to stroll around the village and do some shopping. Annette suggested that perhaps his lordship, in his office on the 3rd floor of the main building, could offer to go with them. The knight happily agreed, but the next second he realized what a huge mistake he had just made. Thus the girl managed to find out where the Grand Duke's room was, and the knight had just confirmed it without even knowing it. Annette used simple deduction to figure out which room belonged to the Grand Duke after all. It wasn't for nothing that she was drinking tea in the garden on such a cold day. The owner of the castle is unlikely to choose a room without a view of the garden, so it must have a beautiful view of the northern lands. And he clearly placed the future Duchess as far away from himself as possible, and it was precisely these guesses that Annette was guided by. This meant that the Grand Duke's room was at the very end of the West Wing. The heroine was absolutely sure of this. Although it is of course strange that the Grand Duke chose the coldest place in the castle, and perhaps his chambers are in another wing. While the heroine was thinking about this, she looked carefully at the window she had chosen, which was the office window. Her guesses were not wrong, and the next second the courageous silhouette of the Grand Duke appeared in the window. Roik noticed the girl sitting below and looking straight into his window, and with horror he realized that she had managed to find out where his office was. He quickly pulled the curtains, but the heroine managed to notice him, and the Duke would hardly be able to escape. No doubt she felt uncomfortable because the Duke clearly saw her looking out of his window. The Grand Duke behaved like a little boy. He hid behind the curtains trying to calm his heart, which was beating incredibly hard. Their eyes had just met, and the Duke was sure the girl had definitely guessed that it was him, because she was definitely not a stupid chicken. What interested him most was the question of why Naden did not look after the princess, since she might catch a cold from drinking tea in a cold place. On the one hand, the Duke was worried about his wife for some reason, and did not understand why such strange thoughts were visiting him. If Annette caught a cold, it would be a huge headache for the Duke, and he would have to look after her, wasting the castle's resources. Annette, accompanied by a knight, arrived at the largest street in the north, where even the floor is paved with gold, which is why everyone calls this street Gold Lane. It looked simply dazzling. Instead of stones, there was real gold here, mined in gold mines, and it seemed that the Marquise's words about rich lands were true. Annette smiled, because the Duke spent an incredibly small amount on their wedding, and the roads in his city were paved with gold. She would have gladly burst into his room right now, but she simply decided to go to the most famous store. There aren't many luxury shops here because life in the North is very different from life in the capital. People in the North don't really follow fashion, and they don't like standing in long lines to buy anything. To put it mildly, these people are practical, but to put it mildly, they are simple-minded. Since Annette had come here to look around, she had no reason to rush, and the heroine was going to have a wonderful time. After some time, she still couldn't find anything, and the shops here turned out to be quite strange. However, in one nice little shop, she managed to find a nice, soft pink hat that matched her face incredibly well. The peak of this hat turned out to be too unusual, and Annette decided to try on leather gloves. She was quite ready to buy them and decided to look at the price first, but to Annette's surprise, the price turned out to have 3 zeros. For such a huge price, one could buy an entire house, and the girl exclaimed in bewilderment why leather gloves were so expensive. The shopping was boring, the things were uninteresting, and the salespeople seemed rude. In a sense, this was entirely expected. There's no point in being polite in the isolated North, and you won't get any more customers anyway. The lady admitted that she was tired and really wanted to have something tasty to eat, so the knight offered her to try that very tomato soup. There was an inn nearby run by Sir Leon's parents, and the knight suggested they go there. Indeed, the knights told about this establishment, and even suggested that the lady visit her parents' hotel, which is famous for its excellent cuisine. The heroine just wanted to look there, because delicious food is the best thing in the world. They said it was quite a famous place, but as soon as Annette entered the establishment, she noticed that there was absolutely no one there. They were met by Léon's kind parents, the innkeeper named Marie, and her kind husband Jacques. Annette admitted with a smile that she had heard that Madame had extraordinary culinary skills, and Sir Léon had praised her signature dish. She was pleased to be received so cordially, for hitherto all who had recognized her in Blenheim had looked upon her with disdain. Marie was incredibly happy that her grace knew their son Leon. It was a great honor for them. Jacques asked what dish the lady would like to receive, and she only had to say so. They were ready to fulfill any request. Annette asked without hesitation to make tomato soup, very spicy and thick, the very soup that all the inhabitants of the North love. Marie asked for this to be provided to her, and for depth of flavor they added white wine to the tomato soup. After some time, the innkeeper set an incredibly luxurious table, and a delicious aroma spread throughout the entire room. Marie was so happy and really wanted to treat the lady, so she even prepared several dishes. The lady wished the future Duchess bon appétit and was confident that she would definitely enjoy the signature dishes. Annette invited Marie to dine together, but the lady was worried about how she could sit at the table with the Grand Duchess. The girl just smiled sweetly and admitted that she would be too bored eating alone, and she would like everyone to join the meal. She also turned to the knight, asking him to sit down next to her to try some delicious treats. The knight and Leon's parents gratefully joined in the delicious dinner, and the atmosphere was incredibly cozy. It really was the best tomato soup the heroine had ever eaten in her life. Jacques was very glad that the lady liked the treat, and the future ruler of the North appreciated their tomato soup. The lady didn't even notice how she drank 3 glasses of wine, and the knight warned her not to drink too much. Annette asked him not to worry, because she had never met a man who could drink more than her. After all, she was officially recognized as the alcohol connoisseur of the company, and this was her last memory of that hotel. When Annette came to, she found herself in a very strange situation. She remembered absolutely nothing. She woke up lying on the floor in the Duke's office, and a gentleman in a white terry robe was lying right on top of her. When Annette woke up, she saw the Duke's face in front of her, and could not remember how she ended up there. As expected from the lady, she managed to have a fun time in the tavern, and the glasses flew off one after another. Even Jacques had already suspected that the lady had probably had enough of drinking, but Annette assured her that everything was perfectly fine with her. In her past life, all her friends called her the Queen of Drinking, and she could drink as much alcohol as she wanted. In her previous job, where she had to entertain clients, her job was to get advertisers drunk so they would agree to unfavorable terms. Even then, some whispered that Annette had only advanced through such meetings. Annette told Leon's parents at the tavern that the people here didn't really accept her, although she had nothing against the people of the North. Jacques was surprised that anyone would dare to dislike the future Duchess, since she was now a true northerner. Annette knew that strangers really thought that way, and some actually treated her with great respect. Jacques considered the legitimate Duchess of the North worthy of adoration, he dared to say. Soon others would appreciate her as well. Marie assured that the Northerners were only stern in appearance, but in reality they were very warm-hearted, and surely the same could be said about the Duke. The lady believed the Duke would be a good-natured man, but she had never seen him before, and perhaps his lordship was simply shy. The girl said she would like to get along with the Duke, but all he does is avoid her. She had been waiting for a long time to meet the gentleman, to at least get a glimpse of her future husband, but unfortunately he never showed up. After a fun evening, the girl was lying in her bed, and the maid suggested that she not think about anything and just finally rest. The lady could not sit idly by and wait to be thrown out, because now she knew where the Duke's room was. She asked the maid to bring some tea to keep her occupied with some work, and she herself was about to go to the master's chambers. Annette decided to burst into the Duke's room under the pretext of having tea, and even took a teapot and porcelain mugs with her. It was time to take extreme measures. The heroine was going to dispel this misunderstanding once and for all. The maid didn't stop her, and soon Annette was standing in the venerable gentleman's office in terry slippers. When Annette sobered up a bit from the shock, she realized that coming here drunk was okay, but she had barged in uninvited, and that was definitely inappropriate. The gentleman's office also had a separate bathroom, and the lady definitely didn't see anyone in the room. Because literally, a couple of seconds later, the Duke himself emerged from the bathroom door in a snow-white robe, having just taken a shower. The appearance of the Duchess caused him incredible shock, and the heroes looked at each other in bewilderment. The young man tried to cover himself with a robe and loudly asked how the girl managed to get there. Annette certainly didn't expect to see the Duke naked, and admitted that she just wanted to see him, but the next second something unexpected happened. The ridiculous slippers, which had slipped out from under her long dress, treacherously slipped out from under her foot, and the world turned upside down. One could say that the end had come right now, and she was ready to fall to the floor, and the tray with porcelain mugs had long since flown out of her hands. If she had known that this would happen, she would have eaten another portion of tomato stew to somehow smooth out the alcohol intoxication. As if by magic, at the last moment when gravity had already taken over, the Duke appeared next to him. With a lightning-fast movement, he managed to grab her, grabbing her around the waist, but the elegance of the rescue did not work out. He managed to put his hand under her head, softening the blow. Lady Annette felt his strong hand protecting her from collision with the cold stone surface. The force of inertia proved too great. The Duke lost his balance and fell to the floor with her. The light velvet carpet softened the fall, but the feeling of surprise still kept Annette in a daze. The Duke, raising himself on his elbow, looked into her eyes with concern. His gaze showed genuine concern, and perhaps even more. The first thing the young man did was ask if she had hit the marble floor, but fortunately the girl was okay. The next second she realized that the Duke had managed to get hurt, and that he was definitely not okay. Scarlet blood was streaming from the gentleman's hand, and he had probably managed to injure himself on the broken porcelain mugs. Annette started to get very nervous, and perhaps the Duke was in a lot of pain right now. She felt very guilty, but suddenly the young man asked the girl not to move. Annette was completely at a loss as to what to do now: run to help the Duke, or do nothing at all. At that moment, the butler appeared in the office, seeing the strange scene and deciding to find out what had happened. He did not expect to see the Duchess in the master's office. The young man asked to immediately escort the girl to her chambers. Annette screamed. The Duke urgently needed help. He was wounded, but Whitley promised to personally take care of the master. This was their first meeting with the Duke of the North, and Annette certainly didn't expect that everything would turn out exactly like this. The young man in the snow-white robe immediately turned away. The heroine assumed that he was definitely continuing to avoid her. She went to her room, feeling immense guilt, because if she had not burst into the Duke's office, this would not have happened. At first, this idea seemed absolutely grandiose to her, but after everything that had happened, Annette felt rather uncomfortable. She remembered well how the Duke put his hand under her head, and thus saved her from a strong blow. At that moment, her heart began to beat faster. The heroine immediately felt it, and it was an incredibly new sensation. She was surprised by another moment after the fall. The Duke, for some reason, suddenly jumped back in the other direction. He might have been uncomfortable with her touch, but there was genuine fear in his gaze, and it was too strange. And only now did Annette realize that all this time she had not thought at all about the Duke's curse, which she knew about. During the war with the monsters, the weakened dragon offered a blood pact to the former duke, and he just needed a vessel to store mana. Having absorbed the dragon's mana core, the former duke won the battles and became famous as a true hero of the north. In the end, he couldn't withstand the dragon's power and one day simply died, his body unable to cope with the amount of mana. After all that had happened, the fate passed to the current duke, who was then still a very small boy. There are two ways to tame the dragon's mana within him. The first is to constantly expend physical energy, so the duke hunted monsters. The second way is physical contact with a woman who is able to share the time of his mana and take some part of it for herself. In the original story, only the saint possessed this gift, and the rest, just by touching the duke, began to experience severe pain or even died. Now Annette finally understood that the duke had been avoiding the meeting all this time to protect her, but she wondered why, in that case, everything was fine with her now. This morning the duke slept for a long time, which had certainly never happened to him before due to the terrible curse. As soon as he opened his eyes, he was very surprised because he felt cheerful and rested. He couldn't even believe it. He really managed to sleep the whole night without even waking up once. Previously, the duke constantly tossed and turned until dawn, troubled by disturbing thoughts, and he could not sleep at all. The night was radically different from the others, and perhaps it was because he still touched her as the future duchess. Roik remembered that moment very well, when the lady was too close to his body. He felt the girl's mana begin to flow into his body, and it was too incredible, a previously unfamiliar feeling of peace. For the first time since the day the duke was cursed, he finally felt alive. There were rumors of women who could share mana, and if that was true, perhaps the duchess had managed to calm his pain. After this, Roik decided not to beat around the bush any longer and frankly told the lady the whole truth. The young man warned the girl that she needed to return to the capital immediately and do it as quickly as possible, which Annette did not expect at all. Hearing this proposal, the girl was surprised and really wanted to find out why the duke made such a decision. She didn't want to trust her fate to anyone at all, and she was sure that the duke's will should at least somehow intersect with her desires. The lord understood that one dragon, which had once wounded his entire existence, was enough for him, and there was nothing more terrible than craving someone's touch all his life. From now on, Annette was married to the Grand Duke, and declared that the north was now her home, and the young man asked her to go somewhere. Roik seemed not to hear her words. He promised to prepare a carriage tomorrow, and also assign guards to accompany it. It was unlikely that it would be possible to appeal to this man's pity, so Annette proudly declared that she too would like to divorce the Grand Duke. But she definitely doesn't intend to do this now, and she asked permission to stay for 1 year and then leave without further ado. Roik responded with a categorical refusal and stated that he could not do such a thing under any circumstances. Annette asked if the gentleman really had a lover, for example, the princess of another kingdom, Rondelise. The lady had no intention of returning back to the capital, and perhaps now she had hit the nail on the head. She warned that if the duke was going to send her to the capital, she would tell everyone that she had spent her wedding night with the master. The duke certainly didn't expect such a turn of events, and asked if the princess really had no shame at all. Annette tried to persuade him to stay for just a year, but for the young man, the time frame was not at all an issue. He decided to be frank with her and admitted that he had inherited his father's curse, which prevented him from living a normal life. As soon as the woman touched Roik, a terrible pain pierced her, and he was sure that yesterday the Duchess was in great danger. Roik insisted that it was not safe to stay here because he could not influence his curse in any way. Few knew about the Duke's curse, so he hoped the girl would keep this secret, despite the fact that she was the daughter of his enemy. In the original story, only a saint could ease the Grand Duke's suffering, but yesterday nothing really happened to Annette. Therefore, the heroine assumed that if she touched the gentleman again, perhaps everything would become clear to her. She asked Roik why nothing happened to her, why she didn't feel the piercing pain. Yesterday she didn't feel any pain, and on the contrary, Annette felt somehow good. She told the gentleman about this sincerely, and it really was the very truth that could not be turned away from. After her words, the Duke was incredibly surprised he had never met a person before who was not hurt by his touch. It seemed that Roika was embarrassed by such conversations, and the young man turned out to be more innocent than the heroine assumed. Annette knew the Grand Duke didn't like her, and she had no intention of even trying to please him. Even though the curse had no effect on her, for some reason the Duke still wanted her to leave here, and if she returned home, everyone would think that she had been rejected. She began to cry quietly. She had nowhere else to go, and she did not want to return to her past life at all. The Duke never expected to see the girl's tears, and he asked her to be careful in the future, but allowed her to stay here. He held out his handkerchief with gold embroidery and asked the sweet lady to stop crying. Annette still managed to get her way, and taking the handkerchief in her hands, she smiled, promising that she would never shed tears again. She promised that if she felt even the slightest pain or caused the Duke any trouble, she would immediately take her things and leave. The heroine suggested drawing up a marriage contract so that they both would understand the terms of their stay. Roik was initially unsure whether to go that far, but Annette was too persistent. In business relationships, contracts always play a key role, and the Duke probably didn't yet know how scary they could be. They signed a contract stating that the heroes mutually agreed to dissolve the marriage after a year, and Annette really hoped for the Duke's help. The Duke himself didn't even understand when the girl managed to persuade him, but the moment that she really wasn't in pain seemed strange to him. He carefully touched the lady's hand, and from that moment on, their marriage union was officially sealed. It seems that the stern gentleman fell into the net of this sweet lady, who has now become his real wife. He gently kissed her hand, and from that moment it became clear to everyone that his terrible curse did not work here. Now Annette was absolutely sure that the Grand Duke's touch did not hurt her. The next morning after her conversation with the Duke, the girl's soul felt lighter, and she felt simply wonderful. She only intended to stay here for a year, but she still treated the servants politely, considering them her new family. Even though she wanted to live quietly, if the Duchess did nothing, rumors would spread. So she definitely had to play her new role diligently, and Annette happily began to live her new life. She stopped at the gentleman's door and knocked, but for some reason no one answered her today. A few seconds later, the young man simply opened the door and was surprised to see the princess right in front of him. The lady wished her new husband good morning, and Roik wondered if something had happened. She said that the Duke might want to have breakfast with her and asked for forgiveness for such an unexpected intrusion. It was rude of her to come so early, and probably the Duke should have at least been warned, but this time he declared that everything was fine. Annette noticed that he was about to tie his tie and offered to help, but Roik was sure that there was no need for that. The lady just wanted to help him. The Duke was so cold that he categorically refused everything. The Duchess assured him that she was excellent at knots, and that the gentleman was clearly not as good at it as she was. Roik continued to insist. He was doing a great job himself, but Annette still offered her help. From the gentleman's stern look, one could tell that he was slowly starting to get angry, but the lady decided to charm him with her charisma. Finally, the Duke agreed, and victory was on his wife's side. She promised to tie the most beautiful tie in the world, and was incredibly happy that the young man finally allowed her to do it. No one had ever touched the gentleman before, and she promised that she would do everything quickly, and he should not strain himself. The lady gently touched his tie. She felt how the young man was a little awkward at that moment. No one had ever tied his tie before, and Roik even held his breath from such closeness. All this time he tried not to look into Annette's eyes, so as not to feel too uncomfortable. But he still couldn't help but glance out of the corner of his eye at her charming, sweet face. While Annette carefully tied the tie, trying to take into account every detail so that everything would turn out just perfect. For a second, Roik could no longer tear his gaze away from her, and he felt his cheeks flush. The gentleman's heart began to beat wildly. His ears turned red like the hot sun. He looked at the girl, and she decided to ask how long the gentleman would continue to call her princess. Roik didn't know what else to call her, and Annette declared that she was his wife, and quite worthy of the title of Duchess. It was too unexpected for him, and the lady suggested calling her simply by her first name. "It is okay, madam." The Duke decided to settle on the Duchess, and agreed that from now on he would call the girl that. Annette happily invited her new husband to go to breakfast, so they could finally spend time together and get to know each other better. The young men in black tuxedos met the lady and were about to tell her what an unusual menu there was today. They were incredibly surprised to see the Duke, who came down to breakfast for the first time in his life. Annette held the gentleman's arm, and the young men noticed this with even greater surprise because the Duke never held hands with anyone. The heroes sat comfortably at a huge dining table, and today's menu included incredibly luxurious dishes. Annette thanked the chef, and he was truly amazing, and the breakfast was, as always, simply delicious. The Duke admitted that he was glad that the lady liked all the dishes, and that the chefs really did a good job. For dessert, a fragrant cake with strawberry filling was served, which was also specially prepared. With great pleasure, Annette took a small bite and sincerely admired the delicious dessert. She was extremely pleased with the filling, which must have been imported from Honduras, and the lady confessed that she would like to visit there someday. Perhaps she will be able to visit there next year for the Duke's next wedding after these words. The gentleman even spat out water from his mouth. Annette laughed out loud and admitted that she was just joking, and it was incredibly sweet to watch the gentleman's behavior. Every day the heroine tried to brighten up her weekdays with meetings with the Duke, but even so she had too much free time. If this were the original plotline, the lady would have no end of things to do, but as it is, all she can do is walk and drink tea. She met the butler, who warned her that his lordship planned to take a stroll in the garden that afternoon. It sounded like an invitation, but she couldn't believe that the Duke really wanted to see her. Whitley is one of the few who knows about the curse and the Duke. He helped Annette because he knew that the curse does not work on her. Wrapped in warm clothes, the girl went out into the yard, which was covered with crunchy snow. At last she met the Duke himself. He stood there, illuminated by the rays of the winter sun, looking straight up into the sky. She walked straight up to him and greeted him while Roik looked at her silently. The lady admitted what a coincidence. She was just getting ready for a walk, and allegedly accidentally saw the gentleman. They decided to take a walk together, and the lady asked if the Duke was avoiding the maids because of his curse. To be honest, the Duke had enjoyed being touched by others before, and when physical contact could lead to death, you start to avoid it. The worst thing was that the Duke was not allowed to tell anyone about this, and it must have been simply unbearable for him. She noticed that the Duke's tie had slipped a little, and the young man had already changed his clothes that morning after training. Annette offered to straighten his tie, but it turned out he hadn't bothered to retie it, and the lady had been tying it so carefully. It turned out that the gentleman simply took it off, carefully, timidly, and then put it back on in the same way in which she tied it. Perhaps he really did like him, but the young man said that he simply considered it inappropriate to untie him when the girl was trying so hard. Annette laughed and warned that from now on the gentleman could untie his tie at any time, and if he wished, she would be happy to tie it again. This attitude was a little unusual for the stern, cold-blooded gentleman who had never experienced warmth in his life. It seemed as if he was beginning to feel something in his body that he had never felt before meeting this girl. Annette thought the Duke was a real cutie and decided to try to get closer to him so she could see this side of him more often. And the 3-visit-a-day operation was starting right now, so that same evening Annette was standing outside his office door again. In fact, she was planning to get closer to him so that he wouldn't be able to push her away later, and she decided that she needed to imprint her face into his memory. Of course, she couldn't tell him exactly that, and some excuse was needed, so Annette decided to simply say goodnight. The young man admitted that he was not dressed appropriately, but the lady asked if, by his logic, she was also dressed inappropriately. Naturally, her outfit was just as inappropriate, but she probably didn't realize that was the main problem. This evening, Annette decided to talk to the Duke by any means necessary and stated that it was too cold in the corridor, asking to come in for just a second. She managed to persuade the gentleman again. He realized that this girl was definitely impenetrable. Annette sat down next to his bed, took the gentleman by the hand, and warned that she was not going to eat him alive, suggesting that he simply relax. With each passing second, Roik felt himself becoming more and more tense, and his body was gripped by a strange anxiety. The lady stroked his hand carefully, and all this time he wondered if she had really only come in for a second. Not long before this, the girl had managed to see the Duke's bedroom, and last time she had not had time to look around properly. This happened for obvious reasons. The Duke was about to go to bed, and Annette, it turns out, woke him up, and now she simply had to put him to bed. She kindly asked the Duke to lie down on his bed so that he could finally relax and stop worrying. Roik was getting more and more tense with each passing second, and he was not at all ready to lie down on the bed where his new wife was sitting. Annette was going to put him to bed because it was because of her that he woke up and she disturbed his peace. In fact, she was a master at this, and as soon as she started talking at work, everyone immediately fell asleep. But the Duke now felt like a child. Annette only now realized that perhaps the curse was preventing the master from sleeping, which is why he felt so anxious. In the novel, the saint will become a duchess in the future. There is a scene where the saint eases the pain of the Grand Duke with the help of her mana. As soon as she touched the master, the terrible pain disappeared, and he fell into a peaceful sleep. She remembered lines like these, and if this is true, then with her frequent touches, she will also be able to ease his pain. Come to think of it, ever since she started touching him more often, Roik had actually started to look calmer. Perhaps the anxiety and pain subsided for a while, and this was noticeable on the young man's calm face. Roik even allowed her to stay in the castle because of his kind nature, so Annette wanted to thank him at least in this way. Annette had no intention of leaving until the young man was in bed, and she didn't care at all what the servants thought. The Duke suddenly asked the girl if she thought she was being too stubborn, and the heroine was worried that he didn't like it. Therefore, having dealt with his indignation, the young man calmly lay down on the soft pillow and stared intently at the ceiling. Just in case he decided to remember that he was a knight who wielded a sword perfectly and a lady should not commit rash acts. Annette laughed and asked if he was afraid that she would attack him, and in response to this, the young man suggested that he remember everything that the lady had said or done so far. The Duke was quite cold-blooded, but Annette was not the type to give up easily. She carefully took his masculine hand to help him try to fall asleep. The gentleman's hand was incredibly cold, and the lady decided that he needed to warm up, and then he would fall asleep right away. The gentleman was sure that nothing would help him, and it was unlikely that he would be able to sleep peacefully. Annette continued to stroke his cold hand, feeling how his skin began to slowly warm up. The tension also gradually disappeared. With each passing second, Roik began to look calmer. The heroine wondered how such a large man could look so broken, and perhaps the terrible curse was causing severe damage to his body. After some time, the Duke fell asleep like a calm sun, and indeed, stroking his hand quickly helped. Annette was happy that the Duke was simply able to sleep well and that she could be of use to him. Now his face looked more like the face of a cute puppy snoring in his sleep. It was all too strange when Annette read about it in the novel. It all seemed so insignificant to her. There, the curse was described in just a few words, and what was completely ignored in the novel turned out to be its harsh reality. Annette could not treat him superficially, as some kind of character to be conquered. Quietly leaving the master's room, the heroine headed to her bedroom, but suddenly heard a strange conversation. The maids were discussing. One of them changed shifts again because there was no one to look after Simone's children. For some reason, the maids were still awake at this late hour. One of them was saying that they had recently been alone, and now a good opportunity had come up. They were discussing the personal life of someone they knew, and one day the maid's sister left her husband with her mother, and soon they had another child. Another maid approached them and asked what they were doing there, since at such a time no one was allowed to walk peacefully through the corridors. The butler clearly told no one to hang around the central staircase after sunset. The maids asked the lady not to make any noise in vain. They assured that they were just chatting there, while there was no hot water in her ladyship's room. Annette realized that one of the girls was her maid, and her voice did sound all too familiar. The maid offered to take hot water to another, but while they were talking, the water quickly cooled down. The lady stated that in that case the water needed to be heated as quickly as possible, and the mistress needed to take it to her room quickly. The lady began to get indignant. She considered herself the Duchess's personal maid and had already been washing windows all day. The ladies turned around and did not fulfill the request of the other maid, declaring that they were already quite fed up with all this. The Duchess's personal maid realized that it looked like she would now have to go to the kitchen to heat the water again. But nothing could be done. These were her direct duties, and all this time the Duchess watched what was happening from the second floor. She probably wouldn't want to drag herself into the kitchen at such an hour, but nothing could be done. The personal maid decided that thanks to this, she would at least be able to drink hot water, and went to the kitchen. Annette decided that next time she would have to ask the name of her personal maid, so that she could finally get to know the residents of the mansion. At that moment, the lady noticed something strange. The maid turned around. It seemed to her that someone was watching her. The next morning, the Duchess decided to greet her husband again, and wished him a wonderful morning. After the wedding, life in the Duke's mansion became completely different, and every day this girl lit up this harsh place with her sweet smile. She noticed that the Duke seemed to have finally gotten enough sleep, and his face was shining and calm. The Duke decided to apologize for yesterday because he himself did not expect to fall asleep while the lady was in his room. In fact, this was Annette's goal. Now that the Duke had experienced the warmth of her touch, it would be difficult for him to fall asleep alone. After some time, the lady was again in the gentleman's office, and the young man asked what had brought her there at such an early hour. Annette smiled sweetly and said she was just bored, so she decided to talk to him. The Duke warned him that he still had some business to complete, but Annette had no intention of disturbing him. She settled comfortably in the chair and decided to simply read a book, asking the gentleman to ignore her and continue working. Few people appeared in the Duke's office except for assistants, but for some reason this girl brightened his loneliness. She even found a book that described different ways of tying ties and studied it carefully. The book contained some very childish drawings, and it was as if the writer didn't have enough money for an artist. Annette decided that instead of reading this stupid book, she could find much better things to do, and she liked looking at the noble Duke much more than reading an uninteresting book. Roik looked at his wife and wondered if she really wanted to ask him something since she was looking at him so intently. The lady replied that she did not need anything, and in fact the Duke was simply so handsome that she could not take her eyes off him. She certainly had no intention of telling him how she felt, and simply continued to look at him. The young man wondered if she really said such things to everyone, but the lady actually had very high standards. She would definitely not have told anyone anything like that. At that moment, Leon appeared in the master's office, bringing the training schedule. Seeing the knight, whom she was already acquainted with, the lady smiled and politely greeted her new friend. Roik was surprised that they already knew each other, and that the lady already knew his name very well. Leon brought the training schedule he had told the Duke about, and he decided to look at it a little later. Annette told Leon that she had visited Madame Marie's hotel a few days ago, and his mother was still bragging to everyone. Leon said that his mother was delighted to dine with the Duchess, and she was also incredibly pleased with the praise, and she arranged feast after feast for a whole week, turning the hotel into a continuous holiday. The Duke listened to the story of how Annette herself missed this place, and even suggested visiting again. He addressed the knight, calling him by name, in order to somehow attract attention to himself. Secondly, he himself just said to wait here, but the next second he changed his mind and asked Leon to leave them alone. The knight had no intention of disobeying his master's orders. He understood everything immediately, but he was afraid that he had managed to do something wrong. Roik noticed that it seemed the girl had managed to get close to the knights, and Leon accompanied her on her way to the Duke's domain. The lady decided to ask how old this knight was, and the Duke did not understand why she was interested in his age. Leon already looked young, but without the shoulder pads he seemed to look even younger. And Annette called him an incredible cutie, which the Duke never expected to hear. She just said that she doesn't say things like that to just anyone, but she just called the knight incredibly cute. Roik stated that this guy was already past the age where he could be called cute. Annette suspected that she might have managed to hurt the gentleman's pride, so he immediately kicked Leon out of the office. The heroine was sitting at the table and enthusiastically writing something. At that moment, the Duke decided to turn to her. She simply felt warm from the fact that they were close, because they had recently become husband and wife. Suddenly, the Duke announced that he had to go. His schedule was booked until late in the evening. He decided to leave suddenly, citing work, but the heroine did not understand him at all. Was he really so taciturn by nature, or did he simply feel awkward around her? In any case, this suit fit him perfectly, and the young man was a model of elegance. Annette became interested in what men wore in the capital, and the only man from there she knew was her brother. He sent her such an expensive gift, she still hasn't thanked him, and even completely forgot about it. Annette decided to write him a letter at the right opportunity, but even if her brother didn't like it, she still had to thank him. She sat down to write a letter and didn't know where to start. She wanted to thank him, but she also had many questions about why he had handed over the box through a servant. Annette tried to compose the letter correctly, and each time she rewrote the first lines. In fact, she didn't even know what to write to him, and squeezing the words out of herself proved too difficult. For a long time she couldn't find the right lines and didn't understand where to start without expressing her dissatisfaction. Suddenly she saw the same maid who politely offered her mistress something tasty to eat. It was definitely the lady she had seen yesterday when she went to the kitchen to heat up the water. The maid brought a lot of treats, and the Duchess decided to thank her for her hard work and handed over a piece of delicious cake. She probably didn't expect such gratitude, and it's unlikely that anyone would give food to an ordinary servant. After biting into a juicy strawberry, the lady wondered if the fruit was really so common in the north, but it certainly didn't grow well in such a cold climate. After the delicious desserts, the lady felt great, and now she could calmly think about the letter. To begin with, she decided to write a greeting, and then come up with the main part to ask questions of interest. The maid asked if she should throw away all the paper from the floor, and while she was writing the letter, she didn't notice how she scattered the sheets of paper in all directions. But the personal maid was distrustful of the mistress, and she decided to take with her one piece of paper lying on the floor. The dark night slowly descended over the northern lands, covering the roofs of the castles in a white blanket of snow. That evening, Annette went to the Duke again to wish him good night. The young man immediately opened the door, as if he had been waiting for the moment when the Duchess would come to him again. Suddenly the gentleman closed the door behind him, and Annette was surprised because he was behaving very strangely. The Duke had not had a chance to tell her this morning, so he decided to do it right now, saying that it would be better if she stopped visiting him at night. He insisted that nothing good would come of their nighttime meetings, while the Duchess looked at him with bewilderment. Roik stated that he knew the lady was checking for his attention with the best of intentions, but asked her not to violate his personal space anymore. Annette asked him if he was really that upset, and that was the reason he refused to see her. The gentleman was accustomed to spending time alone, and he was sure that this was how he should continue to live. This doesn't mean that everything else can be done, and it wasn't just about late-night meetings. He closed the door in front of the girl, and Annette felt saddened to hear such a categorical refusal. She stood for some time near the closed door, not understanding why the Duke had decided to do this to her, and refused any meetings. Today she even took some aromatic oil to massage his hands, and she didn't expect the Duke to simply close the door in front of her. It wasn't just her who felt uncomfortable. The young man also felt bad, but he understood that this was the best option right now. Roik wasn't even sure if he should tell the Duchess about his terrible curse. For a long time he got used to living alone, during which time he became stern and cold, but the girl seemed to decide to change his life. Immediately after the wedding, the Duke asked his assistant to provide information about Annette. Many called her the Marquise's favorite daughter, but there were very plausible rumors that she was an illegitimate daughter. Farrell once asked if the Duke would still treat her so coldly even after this, since their Duchess was not even the Marquise's real daughter. Even his assistant had already gotten used to this girl, calling her the Duchess of the North, and Roik didn't like it at all. Regardless of the truth about her origin, the Duke still had no intention of changing his mind. The Marquis would stop at nothing and would definitely find a way to use Annette. If he finds out that women can die from one touch of the Duke, everything could change dramatically. The peaceful life in Blenheim could come to a real end, and the ruler of the North was well aware of this. One day, that terrible day came when the father finally learned that a terrible future awaited his son. If the Duke's father had known that the curse was hereditary, he would never have made a deal with that dragon. The mere thought that his son would inherit the curse was terrifying to him, because this pain was worse than real death. At that time, the young Duke was still just a child, and he did not understand why his father was talking about some terrible curse. Father had no other choice, but Roik was different. This curse and blood carrying terrible pain had to end with him. He looked thoughtfully out the window. It was still chilly outside, but even in such weather, spring was still bound to come. Roik only had one thought: would Annette like the spring in the northern lands? And this time of year was special for him. Annette's diet included delicious fresh strawberries every day, and she once admitted that she absolutely loved fruit. The Duke noticed that even while eating an ordinary piece of cake, the girl's eyes sparkled, and she always repeated that the strawberries were very tasty. The girl always had a sunny smile on her face, and her voice was incredibly gentle. Near her, even the coldest winter becomes spring, and even the harshest snows can melt away. Roik remembered her phrase perfectly, and without further ado, after a year of living together, she promised to leave forever. The Grand Duchess would not be staying here for long, and the Duke understood that she simply needed a place to stay for the time being. So he must not get used to her warmth, otherwise he will never be able to return to his past life. Annette's presence only dulled the pain, but that didn't mean she could lift the terrible curse. That's why Roik was sure that he shouldn't get close to anyone, and that was the maximum he could let her get close to him. The butler arrived to the master and reported that, on his orders, they had placed an order and that almost everything was ready. Now, every day at dawn, a double portion of strawberries will be delivered, and this is exactly what the gentleman asked for. He also asked to put a side table next to the sofa in his office, and his request sounded strange. The butler immediately understood everything. This was for Her Grace the Duchess, and a small table would be just right for her. Whitley was sure that it would be quite comfortable to rest a hand on such a table, and the Duchess would be madly happy reading a book and eating strawberries. The Duke did not at all want to think that Annette was influencing him, and he was sure that it meant nothing at all. The Duke decided to ask for a small table because when the lady was next to him, he noticed something. Annette never asked for anything luxurious, and she did not look like an impudent aristocrat. She had no need for two comfortable conditions, and she read the book in an uncomfortable position. Just recently, Annette had been touching her shoulder a lot, and the Duke thought that perhaps it hurt. He saw that she was uncomfortable, and he couldn't pretend that he didn't notice, so he was sure that this would be enough. Spring had finally arrived in the far north, the trees were slowly turning green, and it was already possible to be outside without outerwear. In the morning, Annette was interested in only one question, whether the Duke had slept well that day, but she did not go to him, as she was afraid that he would tell her to stay away altogether. Lately, it seemed to her that there were quite a few fruits, and at that moment she saw Pharrell slowly approaching her. She was incredibly happy to see him today, and she and the Duke's assistant developed a wonderful relationship. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and the assistant had been absent from the castle for a long time because he had a lot of work to do. Behind the assistant, to her surprise, the Grand Duke appeared, whom the lady certainly did not expect to see. She was sure that now he would try in every possible way to avoid the meeting, but for some reason today he decided to come. The Duke was heading to the watchtower, he had business there, and the lady asked if he had decided to take a walk. She was sure that today would be better, but apparently the gentleman was still not in a good mood. Farrell asked if the lady had actually read the book, and it turned out that she had indeed read a cookbook. The Duchess happily showed off a new book that had caught her attention. The assistant carefully read the title of the book, and from the title alone, everything became clear to him. The book was called 100 Recipes to Help a Wife Earn Her Husband's Love, and it was a complete surprise to see it in the Duchess's hands. The Duke did not understand at all where the lady found such strange books, because she was constantly trying to learn something. In fact, she found the book in the library. She was actually looking for recipes like tomato stew, and invited the Duke to join her. On the one hand, the young man incredibly wanted to spend time with her, but he understood perfectly well what the consequences could be. Today he couldn't resist spending some quality time together, and the heroes went for a walk through the fragrant garden. The Duke warned that it was cold outside today, and that after the walk it would be better to continue reading indoors. For some reason, Annette felt it was much warmer outside today, or she just wanted to be close to the Duke. Perhaps because someone had told him not to visit them, but the young man said that this only applied to night visits. The assistant admitted that if she was uncomfortable in the chambers, he could vacate the room next to his office, but in response to this, the Duke suggested that she simply stay in his own. Farrell tried to help the sweet girl. The heroine asked if his lordship would be there too. The lady admitted that if the Duke intended to avoid her any longer, she would be forced to decline his offer. Tomorrow was the day of general training for the knights, so the gentleman planned to spend the whole day there. When Annette heard about this, she wanted to come and see the general training, and she had never seen anything like it before. The assistant was happy to see the girl at training, but for some reason the Duke again refused. Farrell decided that it would be better for him to keep his mouth shut while the master was nearby, so as not to anger him further. The Duke was going to check the general training of the knights. He was sure that this spectacle was not for outsiders. His words sounded harsh. Annette was his wife, the one who exchanged marriage vows with him, and now he calls her a stranger. The representative who had married the girl instead of the Duke was standing right there, and the lady was angry that he was treating her like a stranger. There was a ring on her finger, and she remembered very well how the Duke's assistant personally put the ring on her ring finger. The lady turned to the assistant, stating that there was indeed a wedding ring on her hand. Sooner or later, she would still have to formally introduce herself to the knights. The heroine just thought it was a good opportunity since they would all be gathered together. For some reason, the Duke stood silently, and Annette asked if the gentleman really didn't plan to introduce her here at all. He hadn't originally planned on bringing her here, so when she arrived, he hadn't thought it through at all, and he really did look like a terrible husband. Annette was not ready to believe that the Duke was so indifferent to his wife's affairs, and this certainly could not happen. Her words sounded convincing, and the young man agreed, inviting the girl to greet the knightly order during a general training session. Annette was delighted with his consent, and thought this event could be considered wonderful. She completely forgot that she had some things to do and told the boys that she was going to do something. The commander ordered his assistant to gather all the knights on the training field immediately, even though he was going to the watchtower. The Duke glared at his assistant and asked if he really wanted the knights to disappoint the Duchess, so that she would later say what bad nights he had, and he certainly could not lose face in front of the lady. Farrell did not ask any more unnecessary questions, and promised to immediately ask Sir Hedrick to immediately gather all the knights. The Duke also ordered the training field to be cleaned to the point that not a single speck of dust remained, as he was about to solemnly introduce his mistress. Not long before this, the heroine, in a great mood, went to the dress shop where she was greeted by friendly employees. One of the ladies was called Madame La Mondria, and judging by her stern appearance, one could tell that she was the owner of this establishment. Annette said that she was told that this is the most famous, expensive studio in the entire North. Tomorrow, the heroine was going to officially greet the knights for the first time, and she would like to present them with scarves as a gift. Madame looked menacingly at her assistants, and they immediately understood what they needed to do. Literally a couple of seconds later, the most luxurious scarves made of exquisite, expensive fabrics appeared before Annette's eyes. The ladies laid out the scarves on a large table and said that if the lady liked anything, then any design she wished could be created. 99 knights are scheduled to take part in tomorrow's exercises, excluding others currently on mission. The heroine was surprised by such a number because they were not simple soldiers, and she did not expect that there would be so many knights here. And now she needs to voice an order that she needs as many as 99 scarves literally by tomorrow. Annette warned that, as everyone knows, she does not enjoy special favor as the Grand Duchess. Perhaps her decision to make a good impression on the knights was too selfish, and she is probably now asking for the impossible. She asked Madame to forget about it because the task sounded too impossible. Annette thought about perhaps splitting the order between several ateliers, but she couldn't just give the knightly order a random gift. And she declared that the most expensive gift should be precisely this, the best studio in the North. Just now, right in front of Madame, she called her studio the best, and after that she was ready to fulfill any order. The lady asked if there was any particular embroidery pattern that the lady would like to see. Annette took a pen and drew on a piece of paper the emblem she wanted to see, and asked if it was really possible to do so. The madam decided that she must show herself in the best light and promised to make the best scarves in the North. The seamstresses started whispering behind her back. This was too big an order, and it looked like they would all have to work with me without a break. The Duchess thanked the girls and promised that if they completed the task on time, she would be willing to pay double the amount. The sewing studio had never made such an offer, and no one could refuse it. The ladies enthusiastically picked up the scissors and were ready to prepare everything in the best possible way, because money is the best form of therapy. The Duchess once again thanked the ladies for agreeing to such a sudden large order. She had incredible hopes that the seamstresses would create the most unique and beautiful scarves. She smiled, and the ladies blushed with embarrassment, not understanding how a person could have such a charming smile. The next day, the most venerable knights of the harsh northern lands gathered at the training ground. The Duke, with great respect, appeared before them with his mistress, who had recently become a duchess. The knights unanimously greeted Her Grace the Grand Duchess, and at that moment Annette felt an incredible thrill. She was glad to finally meet the knights who bravely defend the northern lands every day. Although their meeting took place rather late, she admitted that she was happy to see them, and the knights could not resist her charming appearance. If the goddess Spring appeared before them, they were sure that she would definitely look like their new mistress. Annette told the Duke that she had prepared a small gift for everyone she would like to remember everyone's face and hand out the gifts personally. Roik didn't even hesitate and allowed himself to be shown from his best side, providing the knights with personal gifts. He ordered the first division of knights to go out one by one, while the knights were puzzled as to whether the lady had really prepared something for them. Each knight approached the lady, and she, with great excitement, solemnly handed him the bag. The gift looked incredibly cute, a snow-white little bag tied with a bright red ribbon. The lady thanked each knight for his service and gave him a personal gift, and for the young men, this kind of treatment was a first. The Duchess made a diligent effort to remember each knight by name, because in this life she wanted to prove herself a worthy person. The Duke was incredibly surprised, because the lady actually knew each knight by sight, and he didn't even imagine that she would treat the knightly detachment with such respect. Suddenly he saw ink on her fingers and her hands were red. At that moment, the Duke realized that it seemed that the lady had been personally wrapping and signing gifts all night. It looked simply incredible, and the Duchess's attitude towards the knights deeply impressed Roik. The knights slowly unpacked their gifts, and in each velvet bag lay a snow-white handkerchief embroidered with the coat of arms and symbol of the northern lands. But what amazed the knights even more was that each received a handkerchief with different embroidery, and the color of the letter on the handkerchief was also different. Some had a red letter, some a blue one, and the young men realized that the scarves were divided into colors depending on the division. The gifts were so exquisite and yet so thoughtful that the knights could tell the lady had put a lot of effort into them. She handed out all the gifts to the knights, and the gentleman assumed that it was probably his turn now. He commented on the Duchess's good work, and since they were finished with the greeting, she decided to leave first. Royk was absolutely sure that the Duchess would also give him a gift, but she was about to leave the training session right now. The lady smiled and wished the Duke a successful training session and got ready to leave. The young man silently looked at the departing silhouette with bewilderment and asked himself only one question. Could it be that she really wouldn't give him anything after she personally presented each knight with a unique handkerchief? And the Duke, with bewilderment, began to realize that, out of the entire knightly troop, he alone had not received the coveted gift. After training, they managed to meet in the corridor, and the heroine sighed, because she did not expect to see the Duke now. She asked why the gentleman had not been wearing a tie since yesterday, and he had always worn one before. The days were getting quite chilly in the far north now, and the Duchess asked if she should bring the tie right away. All this time the Duke had been carrying a red tie with him in his pocket, and now he decided to take it out and show it to his mistress. The lady was surprised that he really had been carrying it in her pocket all this time, but for some reason had not tied it himself. She asked to give her a tie and began tying it with special care, just as she had done last time. Whenever Annette was nearby, the Duke felt a pleasant warmth emanating from her body. He certainly didn't have time to notice that all the knights were standing right next to them, and for the first time they saw the commander letting others touch him. The knights assumed that he must be on very good terms with the Grand Duchess, but surely she was not the same famous villain of the capital, and it cannot be that such a lovely person is bad. During the day, the heroine decided to visit her fictitious husband and approach the Duke's office. As usual, the gentleman was busy with work, but his face didn't even look so stern today. Since it was not yet night, Annette offered to come in and said that she would like to convey something to the Duke. She handed him a snow-white bag, which was tied with a golden ribbon, just like a gift for knights. She carefully handed over the gift and admitted that she would like to give it to the gentleman personally, from the bottom of her heart. It turned out that all this time had been a gift for him too, and of course Annette could not give a gift to all the knights and leave the commander with nothing. The Duke, with a slight bow, accepted the elegantly wrapped package from Lady Annette's hands and felt the anticipation that always arose before opening a gift given with sincere warmth. Having untied the satin ribbon, the Duke carefully unfolded the fine silk, revealing a handkerchief woven from the most delicate material, like a web pierced by moonlight, but the true decoration of the handkerchief was the embroidery. He felt the warmth emanating from the scarf and realized that it was not just an object, but a piece of Lady Annette's soul, embodied in skillful embroidery. Royk looked up at Lady Annette, and his eyes, usually reserved and stern, were filled with genuine admiration and gratitude. He promised to use this handkerchief with pleasure, but the Duke's reaction seemed strange to the girl, but the main thing was that he liked it. Soon a quiet snore was heard in the office, and the Duke noticed that Annette had fallen asleep right on the table. The Duke wanted to take her to his room, but he was afraid of hurting her, and even thought about whether he should call the servants. The thought of the Duchess being carried by another man made him feel uneasy, and he did not want to look at the sight at all. He remembered her words well. Yesterday she confessed that she was not in pain at all, and this means that the curse does not work on her. Annette made it clear that she did not feel any pain from the Duke's touch, but rather felt a warm, tingling sensation. The Duke carefully took her in his arms and only prayed that this time everything would be completely all right and the curse really did not work. Annette didn't even wake up during all this time. She probably received too many positive emotions that she simply fell asleep from fatigue. Luckily, he managed to carry the lady and put her on the bed, and the curse really did not manifest. Annette slept soundly and didn't even wake up, which meant she definitely wasn't in pain right now. The Duke suddenly noticed the ring on the ring finger of his wife, which he had not even touched. He remembered her words. The girl remembered perfectly how the Duke's assistant himself put the ring on her finger. And as soon as the Duke began to think about this, he considered himself a real fool, and now he was sure that it was necessary to come to the wedding himself. He stood over her bed and looked at the sleeping Duchess, immersed in his thoughts about the wedding at which he was not present. He saw large earrings on the young lady's ears and wondered if they might get in the way when she slept soundly. The Duke sat down on the edge of the bed, looking into her calm face, while thoughts whirled through his head. He carefully touched her ear and decided to take off the earrings anyway, so that she would be comfortable, hoping that nothing would happen if he touched her. The Duke did this so carefully that never in his life had he done anything like it. For some reason, he wanted to take care of this girl and see her radiant smile every day. Yesterday morning, the Duke waited for the Grand Duchess at the door of his bedroom, and she arrived at about the same time every time. He didn't mean to tell her not to come back at all, and he wondered if his words had sounded too harsh. Considering the expression on his face when he said this, the girl was most likely simply scared, so the young man decided to meet her for breakfast. The next morning he sat in the dining room all alone, and today he ended up having to eat alone. Because of this, the Duke could not even concentrate on his work, and he could not believe that he had been too harsh with this fragile lady from the capital. Luckily, he managed to find her sitting in the garden, and the young man even felt that he was glad when he saw her. A radiant smile once again appeared on her face, making it impossible to resist and stop looking at her. For a moment, the gentleman's cold expression changed to a more pleasant one as soon as Annette came into view. Just yesterday, an unexpected situation occurred when the Duke was in the girl's room, and the maid was about to bring her hot tea. She screamed in surprise as she saw the Duke trying to remove the earrings from his wife's ears. The maid began to apologize. She had not thought at all that there was anyone in the room. The Duke felt so awkward that he simply asked her to leave the water and go out. At first he was rude to the Duchess, told her not to come to him at night anymore, and in the end he was caught in her room. It may look pathetic from the outside, but the Duke had completely different thoughts on the matter. Soon Annette finally woke up and realized she was in her room, but she definitely couldn't have come here. She only remembered reading a book in the master's office, and as soon as she woke up, the maid immediately came to her. Annette asked the lady if she knew how she had managed to get into the bedroom yesterday. As soon as the conversation turned to last night, a sly look appeared on the maid's face. She said that His Grace the Duke personally ensured that the lady fell asleep safely. The heroine was even more surprised when she saw her earrings lying on a velvet pillow right next to the bed. Did he really even bother to remove this little thing, while the lady, even when sober, can't remove them so neatly? She imagined the Duke carrying her down the corridor, and even suggested that he probably threw her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. In any case, she was now mortally ashamed, and she did not understand how, during the entire time he carried her, she never woke up. She decided to ask the maid if she knew where the Duke was now, and the girl heard that he had gone away on business and would return late in the evening. It would be awkward if they collided now, and yet for Annette it was much better. At first, she didn't know what to do without the Duke, but then she decided it would be better to just go eat tomato stew and enjoy the wonderful life of a duchess. She went to Leon's parents, and Marie was incredibly happy to see the lady, although she apologized for having to seat her at a table in the corner. As expected, the stew turned out to be the most delicious in the world again, and even the cook at the Duke's castle cannot compare to Marie when it comes to this dish. Unfortunately, she couldn't eat this stew every day, and Marie suggested leaving the recipe, which wasn't such a secret. The lady felt she was indebted to this lady, and this was even too much on her part. She wondered if perhaps she should do something in return for a main street. There weren't many people here, and it seemed that people came here more to eat than to stay overnight. Annette wondered if the low number of guests was due to the season, but unfortunately, the hotel as a whole rarely saw travelers. Marie admitted that it was only thanks to the lunches that their business was still going strong, and if it weren't for the food, they would have gone out of business long ago. Marie cooked incredibly well, and the Duchess was sorry that there were so few customers. But suddenly, an interesting thought came into her head, and she couldn't even believe how she hadn't thought of it right away. It was good that she had managed to think about this before she left, and the lady came up with a grand plan. She just wanted to do something nice and special for Madame Marie to thank her for her hospitality. She asked how about trying to cook and sell delicious food. Of course, it was up to them to decide whether to listen to the advice or not, but she was confident that the idea would help them increase their profits. After a delicious lunch, she returned to the mansion, where the butler met her and informed her that Madame Lamondria had arrived. His Highness the Duke asked to check the girl's wardrobe, as the season would soon change and it was necessary to buy new clothes. The Duke had become a bit too attentive lately, but he was the type of person who didn't like variety in clothing, and Annette didn't think he cared. And she wondered with horror whether the Duke had decided to do this because he didn't like her dress. Or perhaps it looked so shabby that the Duke decided to buy new clothes as soon as possible. Today the Duke discussed with the knights the problems with the trading company, which had been deliberately underpricing its products, and now they needed to intervene and stop them by force. It sounded like another headache, and the master's assistant was well aware of it. For some reason, the Duke was incredibly silent today, and Farrell asked if he was really thinking about the Duchess right now. He assumed the gentleman wouldn't be smiling because of the problems that had arisen, but there was definitely a smile on his face now. The commander of the Formidable looked at Farrell and said that the young man had managed to become bolder after the arrival of the Duchess. He claimed he was simply checking to see if the Duchess liked the new clothes, but that meant he was still thinking about her. The assistant asked if he had really called a dressmaker from a famous atelier. The Duke did not understand whether there were any problems, and the knights themselves said that she needed new clothes. Last night, the Duke announced that he needed to increase the Duchess's personal allowance. It seemed to him simply necessary. She spent her allowance on gifts for the knights, and the more he got to know her, the more this girl seemed caring to him. The assistant noticed. He saw the luggage that Annette brought with her, and it seems that she is completely lacking clothes and accessories. Most of her wardrobe consists of simple and modest dresses, but now that she has become a respectable duchess, she definitely needs luxury. For one simple reason, the Duke did not notice this, because the lady looked simply beautiful in any clothes. He offered to allocate a separate budget for clothes for her ladyship, but she also did not have a servant who could accompany her to the studio. The Duke ordered to find the most famous studios so that they would not be inferior to those in the capital, and had no idea what he should do now. He decided to contact Leon to ask which ateliers in the north were the best. Among the places where noble ladies go, one place is the most popular, and even the handkerchiefs that Her Grace distributed to the knights were made there. Roik didn't understand why all the knights knew the Duchess better than he did, and even knew which studio she went to. Leon suggested to the Duke that since this was a gift, it would probably be better to present it in a different way and hand it over in person. Leon assured that the Duchess, as soon as she saw the gift, would be incredibly delighted with the unexpected surprise. His words were quite logical. The Duke wondered if this could really please the young lady. Noble ladies can be fickle, and some might take this as criticism of her appearance, but the Duke was sure Annette should not think so. If the Duchess feels even the slightest bit offended, then all the knights will certainly be in trouble. Soon the knights returned to the duchy after completing their business, and it was already late at night. They were met by the head butler, and the Duke guessed that Annette had been waiting for him, and it seemed that the surprise gift had brought her a lot of joy. Roik knew it was already quite late, and a visit might seem inappropriate, but the butler suddenly announced that the Duchess had asked Leon to come into her office before she went to her chambers. At that very moment, Leon was ready to fall through the ground, and did not understand why the Duchess decided to call him at such a late hour. Even standing behind the Duke, one could sense how angry he was, not understanding what it all meant. And could it really be that all this time his faithful wife, the Duchess, had actually been waiting for Monsieur Léon, and not for her husband at all, and now the Duke needed to figure this out?